Initiating moisture.
Welcome to the Moist Meter. Today we're taking a look at Deathloop. It's from Arkane Studios and they just don't fucking miss. I'm a big fan of the studio, even their lesser big projects like Dark Messiah. And I was pretty excited for this game and I'm happy to say I wasn't let down. But I do want to get out right now and just pull my pants down and hit you with something. This is not a 10 out of 10 game. I don't understand how any publications are giving this 10 out of 10. It is very far from perfect, but it is still a very fun game. Let's get into it right away. What is the biggest problem with this game? It's the AI. The AI is the worst I've experienced in a AAA title in a long, long time. The AI only does one thing. When the AI is alerted to your presence, they just stand still and shoot at you and maybe take cover. It's rare they will, but sometimes I've seen them take cover. It does happen occasionally. But 9 times out of 10, they'll all just cluster up like they're trying to huddle together for warmth during a cold front, and they'll just stand there in this fucking giant meat orgy and shoot at you, standing still. So you can just throw a grenade at them, and they usually won't even move away from the grenade. They'll call it out, they're like, "Grenade! But I want to die to this," and then they'll just let themselves all die to it. The AI is absolutely astonishingly bad in every way. You can literally stand up in front of one of them, maybe 5 feet away, and they will not be alerted to your presence, or it will take them a very long time to notice you. You can sprint through whole levels without even getting detected, running right by them, brushing shoulder to shoulder. You can run by AI and just tap them on the ass as you go by. They won't even care. The AI's trash. That is my biggest complaint with this game. It's not to say the game isn't challenging, because sometimes they overwhelm you with just the sheer amount of enemies they throw in there. And their guns do a lot of damage, so you will be dying from time to time. But most of the time when you die, it's to a death you caused. For example, you'll get the 4-pounder with the toxic cloud and you'll accidentally shoot in the cloud and blow yourself up. Or you'll fall off a cliff that you didn't pay attention to, or fall into water that was a little too deep to stand in. Most of your deaths are going to come from your own mistake as opposed to the AI actually getting the better of you. So now that my biggest complaint's out of the way, let's dive into what makes the game so great. The gameplay I think is extremely fun. It feels a lot like Dishonored, as you would expect since it's the same studio, and I love Dishonored gameplay, so that's a positive for me. It's different though because the guns are here, and the guns are pretty varied in what they can do. I don't think there's a ton of guns, so there's not a huge selection to pull from. But what makes the guns unique is how you use them, like what trinkets you put on them. Trinkets act like little bonuses that you can give your guns. For example, you can give your gun a faster rate of fire, faster reload, stuff like that. So you can take your guns and outfit them in ways that fit your play style. And the guns do have different perks. Like I mentioned, one of them shoots a toxic cloud, which does damage and explodes if there's like an ignition in there. So there's very cool weapons here, just not a ton of them. So don't go in there expecting like a million weapons to choose from. But I just really enjoy the gameplay. The gunplay feels pretty crisp. It does feel slow at times, but I'm also just not used to playing a shooter on consoles. And I downloaded this for PS5 because the performance on PC is abominable from everything I've read. It has hard crashed my friends' PCs multiple times. The game has a hard time playing itself on PC. So I just didn't bother playing it on PC. I just went right to PS5 to avoid that. And that is another reason this should not be a 10 out of 10 because it is such a bad PC port. So that is another thing to be very aware of when thinking about getting this game. But if you do have a console, it is worth picking up. It is very fast-paced if you want it to be, or it can be very stealth-oriented if that's how you prefer to play it. Kind of slow-roll the enemies and steam their ham as you go by. There's a lot of stealth options. There's some slabs, which is basically like superpowers, of course. So you have a slab that can let you go invisible. Then you have some upgrades that your slabs can get, such as being able to go invisible, kill someone, and it doesn't leave a trace. Not that that's that important because almost no one picks up on a dead enemy. You can literally blow someone's head off and have the blood hit another enemy and they won't be alerted to your presence because the AI is so bad. But it is worth noting that there are a lot of options for stealth gameplay if you do like it. And the stealth is fun. Like there's nothing wrong with stealthing the game. It's fun, but it's not necessary because you can basically stealth the game by just speedrunning it because no one ever notices you're there. Now, I mentioned a few of the mechanics, such as some trinket upgrades for your weapons, as well as slabs and upgrades for those. Another mechanic that I think is great is the looping mechanic. So you have a certain amount of day, or a certain time throughout the day that you get to experience things which change the narrative, and they change the way the maps play and who's there. And after the day ends, you restart from scratch, unless you use their infusion, which allows you to preserve the gear that you want and the traits that you want to keep. I really like the mechanics here. They're not super deep, but they're super effective. I found myself really trying my best to come out with the optimal loadouts, and it was just a lot of fun to play around with builds. So I do like it. I think the gameplay is deep enough, and the gameplay is a lot of fun. That's definitely the highlight. Another thing that I found really impressive was the voice acting. The performance from each character in this game is really fucking good. Writing is pretty solid as well, but what really sells the writing, even when it's kind of weak, is how great the voice acting is. Every character does an extremely good job. Every character was likable and interesting, and I just really got into the narrative of it and just enjoying the universe that they've built up here. I love the setting and I love the art style as well, so the visuals hit for me too. Now the focal point is obviously on the campaign here, going through the narrative and taking out your targets in creative ways and piecing together the story, as well as like finding out your targets' daily routines and coming up with the optimal time to take all of the visionaries out. But aside from just the campaign, there is a multiplayer component, and I think it's a really good idea conceptually, but executed poorly here. So throughout your campaign, if you choose to, you can have your multiplayer turned on, online, and while you're playing campaign, other players can invade you, kind of like in Dark Souls, but just not as well fleshed out. So when you get invaded, it's another player-controlled character playing as Juliana, who's trying to stop you from breaking the loop, and then you engage in a PvP situation with that character, as well as the NPCs in the world. And I think it's a really clever mechanic, if only it worked 90% of the time. At least 90% of the time would be great. It's super laggy online. Very rarely will you have a game where it doesn't lag when you try and do the multiplayer. Like if you're trying to invade someone, you're probably going to be lagging in their room. It also takes a long time to find games, at least on the PS5. That's probably due to just PS5s being like a fucking myth and non-existent in the world. But it is worth noting. I like the idea because I love PvP invasions. I think that is great in Dark Souls, and I think it could work great here if it was just a little more stable and a little more balanced. So you can basically, when you invade someone, just keep mashing R1 and insta-kill them. R1 is your melee, it's a machete, and it one-shots the other player. So you can just one-shot them easily every time. It seems busted. And even if you don't want to run around with a melee build, you can just use a shotgun, which is also pretty much a one-shot if you're even kind of close. Or the toxic pistol I mentioned earlier is a one-shot headshot on any player character from my experience. I've invaded people and have been invaded numerous times now, dozens of times each, and it's never really a close fight. Whoever sees who first usually wins because everyone's running the toxic pistol. It's the strongest weapon in the game. At least I'm pretty sure it is. I haven't seen anything even close to as strong. So if you just see them first, you can just one-tap them with that bad boy pretty much every time. I like the idea. Like I said, I think conceptually it's a great multiplayer idea. It just wasn't fully realized here. Maybe if they keep updating the game, they could like balance that out and make it something pretty special. But as of right now, it's just a good idea that is fun a couple of times, but then just becomes a bit of a headache that you'll probably turn off so you can just have fun in the campaign instead. I know I've said quite a few complaints about the game, and that's because it's not a 10 out of 10 game, and I think people need to recognize that. It's a very fun game, but it's a very flawed game. I really enjoyed my time with it, and I am still playing it because I have fun with it. There's a lot of creative ways of approaching combat, and I like the Arkane Studios formula when it comes to high-octane gameplay. I absolutely love that shit. So I enjoy the game, but I think it's important that you recognize the flaws, which is why that's why I've went pretty hard on them. So plugging Deathloop into the moist meter, I'm giving this bad boy a 70%. I think it's a fun game to pick up if you have a console. I wouldn't recommend it on the PC till they fix the PC version because from what I've read and from my friend's experience, it is almost unplayable most of the time. So that's about it. So yeah.